If your property market's crowded with similar homes that aren't selling, how do you make sure yours is one of the few that actually does? And if you've got tenants in it as well, do you get them out first or sell with them in? Well, those are exactly the questions a landlord with a London flat asked me this week, and the answer may have saved him somewhere between £30,000 and £70,000. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the full consultation, including how to actually sell in a crowded market, the 2 fast sale routes we ruled out and why, and the 6-step plan we built instead, including one move most estate agents will tell you is crazy. So Dan, which isn't his real name, is a landlord with a 2-bed flat in an outer London suburb. The flat's tenanted and comfortably so. The tenants are 2 years in, the rent's paid up to date, and they've got no plans on leaving. Last year, he tried to sell it. He launched at around £325,000. He turned down an offer of a little over £300,000 and eventually pulled it off the market unsold. And why? What was the main challenge? Well, because this is a crowded market, there are well over 100 similar flats for sale within half a mile of his, and that whole experience had left him extremely disappointed in estate agents as well. He even wound up having to do his own viewings last time, and he hated the whole thing. So one morning recently, as an alternative, he rings around some quick sale we buy any house companies instead to see if it's a better option for him. But the best offer he comes away with is £230,000 for the flat he was asking £320,000 for last year. So he puts the phone down and books a call in with me the same day, because here is the detail that decides everything for Dan here. He has no deadline at all. He's selling to fund a wedding and an extension. No fixed dates on either yet, and he'd happily wait a year or more for the right price. That's how he feels, and those are his priorities. So that's the real question for our call. Is £230,000 the price of escaping a difficult market like this, or is it like, £95,000 for nothing? Well, first, let's look at those fast sale options properly. Exit number 1 is the We Buy Any House type company. That £230,000 offer sits roughly £70,000 below the last offer that he had last year when it was on the market, and that kind of difference is pretty normal. A genuine, well-funded house buying company only pays about 80% of the market value. That's why the offer came back so low. Too low for Dan, and most of these companies won't buy tenanted flats anyway, so we cross them off the list. Exit number 2 is auction, but selling at auction typically nets you about 10 to 15% less than you would get selling through a decent local estate agent. On this flat, that means missing out on 30 to 45 grand. The reason you lose so much at auction is basically down to the buyer pool. So first, fewer people can or will bid at an auction, and so there's less competition to push up the price. And secondly, the ones who do buy at auction are typically there looking for a bargain. So auction can be the right fit on homes that can't be mortgaged, but an ordinary mortgageable flat like this one is the opposite. So notice what both of these quick sale options really are. You're buying speed, you're buying back time, but Dan's in no rush. Time is something he's got plenty of. So yes, you're paying for a bit of certainty as well. And in a competitive market like this that Dan was struggling to escape, it is an escape hatch. But how bad is this local market really? This crowded local market, how bad is it? Well, there's a quick 2-minute check that we can do to find out. And you can run this on your own home and your own market as well. So simply put, count the comparable homes for sale near you in a price bracket around your own. Then count how many of them have a sale agreed. You can do this on Rightmove by toggling the little filter that kind of lets you include or remove sold properties. Okay, it's a blunt tool and agents can game it in some areas, but it's proven really useful for us over the years. And for Dan, it's about 80 comparable flats in his price bracket, and roughly 1 in 5 had sales agreed. So we see typically anywhere between about 10% to 50% of sales around the country having sales agreed. So Dan's market is on the slow side, but it is nowhere near frozen. Buyers are transacting right now at his sort of price. So the real question isn't just how does Dan escape this market? It's more like this. It's who are those 1 in 5 people who are getting buyers, and how does Dan become one of them? And so here is who actually sells in a crowded market. It is basically, in a nutshell, the properties that are the best deals. And that means 2 things at once. It means it looks great, and it's a great price. That's what making your home the best deal means. But that alone is not enough. You need one other thing as well. You need people to actually see it. It's got to be well promoted, which means tons of exposure. All the buyers in the local market looking for this type of property have actually got to see it. And Rightmove alone is not enough, and I'll come on to that and why that is the case. But first, let's score Dan's last attempt at selling against that list. So in terms of presentation, it was genuinely fine. You know, his tenants have redecorated the property themselves. It looks better now apparently than it did in the old marketing photos when he had originally bought it. In terms of promotion, it was one agent against 100 competing flats, so it was pretty thin on the exposure side of things. And then in terms of price, he launched high to not much interest, so it's likely one of the reasons the sale stalled. So 2 of the 3 went wrong last time, and both are fixable, and the plan we built fixes them. But before that plan, there is one bigger question sitting underneath this whole sale, which is who is actually going to buy Dan's flat? Okay, because it's tenanted at the moment. So are we going to sell to another landlord, or are we going to sell to an owner-occupier? Well, the best prices for a flat like Dan's are paid by owner-occupiers. People buying a home, making an emotional connection, wanting to live in it. They're the people who pay the highest prices, not investors. The other benefit of targeting owner-occupiers is that there are way more of them than there are investors as well. In terms of investors, they are on their way out now. There are fewer of them than there have been in years, and more of them are selling up than buying. And the ones who are still buying know exactly how strong their position is. There are not many landlords to sell to, and so they want to cash in that position. They want a bargain. So if we limited ourselves to just selling to investors, A, we'd have a smaller pool of buyers, and B, we'd be limited to the ones who just pay the cheapest prices. So decision made, we want to sell to an owner-occupier, which means the tenants have got to move out before completion so the new buyer gets a nice empty home to move into. And so the next question becomes, well, when do these tenants go? Does he get them out now before the property goes on the market, or just before completion, having helped him sell the place? And that kind of leads us into the next section, which is, well, the helped part is particularly relevant here. Are these tenants actually going to help the sale, or are they going to hinder it? Dan already knew the answer, and in his own words on the call, they're not going to help out. They're not going to go out of their way to help me sell it, because then they have to find a new property themselves. And he's right. And legally, it almost goes further than most landlords realise. So a tenant has a right to what's called quiet enjoyment, which in plain English means nobody goes in without their agreement. Not you, not your estate agent. A viewing clause doesn't override that. And the famous 24-hour notice rule is about repairs, not about viewings for sales. So how the flat looks and whether buyers can even get through the door to view it are in the tenant's hands. And they are 2 of the biggest levers in this whole sale, which leaves the landlord 2 ways to get back control of those. So option number 1, and this is the one you'll hear everywhere, is move the tenants out first and then start the sale process trying to find a buyer. The reason this is recommended so much is because an empty flat genuinely is easier to sell, and it's for 3 real reasons. So first, you control the viewing diary. In general, what we've learned over the years is that the easier we make it to view a property, the more people will come to view it. Really simple, and it's especially even more so in a competitive market, because imagine the tenant says something like, yeah, you can do a viewing 2 weeks from now at 1 o'clock. Well, in a crowded market, the buyer's just going to go and view everything else, and you're not going to sell. So access for viewing arrangements is really important. Second, you control how it looks. You don't have to worry about the tenants dirty washing up, still sitting in the sink. And there's no risk of the tenants digging their heels in at the end of the process either, making it difficult to move out. And so because it's so much easier without tenants there, for years, this tended to be my exact advice as well. Move the tenants out in an ideal world and then look for a buyer. But what's changed is the cost of getting to that stage. So since the Renters' Rights Act came in, moving tenants on takes longer and it's much harder to undo. Because if you can't find a buyer or you decide not to sell, you can't just put a new tenant right back in there. You're literally not allowed to rent it out again for 12 months if you evict a tenant to sell it and then can't. So for Dan, moving the tenants out means months of mortgage and bills with no rental income and no easy way back to the tenanted property. Is basically burning the boats, and all to fix a problem that can be solved far more cheaply, which is option number 2. So option 2 is don't take those levers back by moving the tenant along, buy them back. pay your tenants to be on your side, and it's kind of the move that nobody expects. So a heavy disclaimer on this first, because this is not the norm. Most estate agents will call it a crazy idea, so will most solicitors. The regulations make it fiddly as well, and this isn't legal or financial advice. So run it past your own solicitor and treat it as a tactic for your own judgment and your own risk. This is not advice. But what I would argue is a very smart thing to offer in many of these situations is a one-off sum of around a month's rent. So on this flat, maybe 1,500 quid to £1,000 to 1,500 to 2,000 in return for the place staying presentable and viewings being easy and a smooth move when the sale completes. So put it in writing as a short separate agreement, never a rent cut, pay it on completion, and make it genuinely optional. Nothing that could ever be read as pressuring your tenant to leave. So could it change? Nothing at all. Sure, maybe the tenants would have been helpful anyway. Maybe the tenants won't respond to an incentive either, but doing something like this and incentivizing the tenant to be on your side can be the difference between selling and not selling, or the difference between having a buyer who paid 10,000 more come and view and love and want to buy it, versus them not being able to get in or coming to see it and thinking it's gross because they presented it really badly. But and so in a nutshell, it can pay off big, and it's a trade I would make in many circumstances, especially if you're really serious and committed to selling. So here's the full plan, and notice how it fixes all 3 P's at once. So the tenant deal, that's presentation and viewing access, bought for 1 month's rent, maybe a couple of £1,000s in this situation. Second, cleaners in before the photographer. Why do this? Well, a good set of pictures can be worth thousands of pounds, and in a market as crowded as Dan's was, it will often decide whether a buyer clicks your listing at all. Paying for a morning of cleaning on behalf of your tenants feels odd, right up until you compare it with the cost of having an awful set of photos, which can knock thousands off your sale price and add months extra to your timeline. It's like money well spent. 2 local agents, not 1. So you get 2, when you have 2 agents, you get 2 listings on the portal, you get 2 buyer databases you have access to, and you have 2 teams cross-selling the property for you. Now, the reason this is important, and the reason I said earlier Rightmove is not enough, only 30% of our sales come from Rightmove and the other property portals. The other 70% come from agents proactively working the sale for us, working their database, cross-selling the property to generate viewings. That's why the choice of agent is so important. Next, launch price right first time. So we want to push every agent for comparable evidence behind their number. In this market, 80% of the stuff is sat there not selling. We want to forget that. Don't anchor ourselves against asking prices. Look at the properties that are selling. Rightmove's own data tells us that properties that get the price right first time around and never need a reduction find a buyer currently in about 36 days, whereas homes that do get overpriced, need a reduction, they end up taking 127 days to find a buyer. It's literally 3.5 times as long. That is the value in getting an accurate valuation first time around. And in a crowded market like this, it's even more than that, and it can be more like the difference between selling the property or not selling it at all. Next, consider handing viewings back to the agents to do next time around. So like I mentioned earlier, Dan had conducted his own viewings last time, and I understand exactly why. He sells for a living and he knows the flat better than the agent's sort of unenthusiastic office junior ever will. The catch is, and this applies to you if you want to do your own viewings as well, you might be a bit of a control freak. I kind of tend to be the same way as well. The problem is, when an owner shows someone around the property, I've often seen buyers experience it almost like the owner is giving a tour of their property, when what we need is the buyer imagining it as their property. I've seen owner-led viewings go wrong over and over again for that reason alone. So consider handing the viewing arrangements back to the agent, or just be really conscious of that whole thing if you're doing them yourself. Next, instruct a solicitor before you list. The time to complete a leasehold sale once you have a buyer is around 5 months right now. It's insane. So get signed up with your solicitor first to buy back some of that time later. Consider even lining up the leasehold information pack first. Some of those places, in some management companies, taking 6 weeks to come back. You can short circuit that by just going ahead and getting the information proactively instead of waiting until later on in the process. And so the trade we basically agreed on during the call was implementing this plan costs about £2,000 in the form of that that tenant incentive, and you only pay it when the property sells, and a bit of patience as well, and maybe 2-3 hours cleaning. That's kind of it. The exits we ruled out, so auction and the house buying companies, cost £30,000 to £70,000. So here, don't pay £70,000 to avoid the tenant problem. Pay like £2,000 to just solve it. Same flat, same market. It's like the opposite price tag. So here is where Dan lands. He is not taking the 230,000 and he's not emptying the flat. He's going back to the open market with the tenants in situ, with 2 local agents at a realistic launch price backed by evidence, with a solicitor lined up before the listing goes live, and he's having that conversation with his tenants about making the whole thing easy for them too. That's the trade thousands of landlords could be making right now, and almost no one spells it out in those terms. Now, if you're anywhere near the same decision yourself, I built a free quiz that finds the selling route that actually fits your property and your priorities. It takes about 60 seconds. If a fast sale is genuinely the right option for you, I'll point you to the option and companies that I know and trust. If it isn't the right option for you, which is the case more often, I'll tell you that as well, and I'll tell you what I'd do instead. The quiz is linked down below in the description. And since you made it to the end of this video, I'll share this with you as well. What you just watched was from a free consultation I had this week. I do calls like this most days, and if you want to book one for yourself with me personally, there is a link at the bottom of this description for you to do that as well. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.